Well, we're continuing our series in the new year called Making Things New. Last year we talked a little bit about the fact that a lot of the language we use around New Year's, the idea of letting go of the old things to make way for the new, the idea of resolving to do something different, to carve something out to make way for a better thing to come into our lives, is really resurrection language. And we talked about this idea that at the heart of making things new is this message of resurrection. That we are a people that are called to find those things to reflect upon our lives, find those things that are out of step with God, carve them out, and be reborn into someone new, into someone different. And that language is all through the New Testament. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some things over the coming weeks that are going to help us understand a little bit about how this process works, how our spiritual disciplines and our spiritual practices really help to renew us day by day as people spiritually, and that also then spills over into the other things that we are resolving to do in our lives, the changes that we're trying to make. I really like Carly's children's chat this morning, because it really drives home, to me anyway, the point that you can't put a price on peace of mind. You can't put a price on being able to rest easy at night because you know that everything's laid on the table and you don't have anything kind of hanging over your head or a skeleton waiting to pop out of the closet. And we're going to go a little deeper with that notion here. We're going to look at this idea or this practice of confession, which for many of us is a scary kind of a word. So we're going to take a look at some of the things that make it a scary proposition because of who we are, where we've grown up, the culture in which we live. We're going to take a look at a little bit of the history of confession in the Christian tradition. And then we're really going to drive it home by trying to hopefully understand a little bit about why confession is so good for our soul and why it is such a necessary component if we want to be truly transformed more and more into the image of Christ. Now, for me, when you hear the word confession, what pops to mind for you? Okay, Catholic? What else? Say again? Done something wrong. Okay.
Catholic Church.
Catholic Church, absolutely. In fact, one of the reasons that we have this association between confession and the Catholic Church is this is a practice that originated in the Catholic Church, obviously. All churches were Catholic up until in the 1500s. And then, Martin Luther did his thing. We had a little bit of a split. But we see this image recounted over and over again. I think one of the most familiar images, if you watch TV or movies, how many of you have seen the dark wood box with the sliding window that obscures? You can kind of tell your thing to the priest, and the priest then will give you some penance to do and absolve you of your sin. And it's all over the place in film and television. And it's often in there in a way that's not necessarily negative at all. It's in there many times as a marker for us to know that a character is seeking redemption, that a character is coming to an awareness and seeking to be transformed, and their image of how that is done is to be made right with God. And so they go to the confessional, and many times it's a character that has no religious really background whatsoever, but that image is so strong of the need to unburden ourselves to another person and for somebody to reassure us that no matter what we've done, we are forgiven. Very, very powerful image. There's another image of confession that's also very powerful, not nearly as comforting. Anybody ever watch a show like Law and Order? Okay, and you get like the cop in there, he's banging on the table in the interrogation room, trying to get somebody to fess up and tell the truth. And there's this sensibility there that it's like confession is a scary thing. You've done something so horrible that the law is going to get in your face with handcuffs and, threaten to rough you up a little bit if you don't spill the beans. And that's a kind of doesn't make you really want to
be in that situation. But that situation also paints a very real truth about confession. And it's that confession, the image of being in the confessional with the priest is a very personal thing. It's a redemptive thing. It's I need to know that I'm okay with God. The more law and order kind of thing reminds us that confession is not just necessary many times for the individual, but it is also necessary for healing to happen on the part of somebody that was offended. That if I have done wrong to somebody and I never make that right, if I never admit that wrongdoing, there's a constant tension between me and that individual. And these police kind of shows is this sense that in order for justice to be done, in order for things to really move forward, the truth has to be known. And whether that is known because somebody confesses to wrongdoing or because circumstances prove things out, there's a need for things to be aired and out in the open. Because to keep them in here is damaging both to the person keeping them in and many times to people who need to have that reconciliation to move forward in their own lives for healing to recovery. But these images are very played up by Hollywood and can make the idea of confession a little bit dodgy. Now let me ask you this. How many of you have ever bore your soul to somebody and had it come back around to bite you? You ever confessed to somebody about something? Someone that you thought was going to keep confidence? Someone that said that they could be trusted? And then very shortly thereafter, whether for vindictive reasons or just gossipy reasons, that truth gets spilled and it comes back and stabs us all. That does not make us want to share. That does not make us want to confess. In fact, if anything, that says, keep your mouth shut. Because it's better to deal with whatever the pain is inside than have to deal with the ramifications of what's going to happen if this gets put out there and everybody finds out about it. So there's some very real baggage with this term confession, but it doesn't change the need for it. It doesn't change our spiritual need to put things out there, to get it off our chest. Whether it's to another person or directly between us and God. And there's a bunch of things in between. What it also is a call for us as a church to cultivate a relationship with one another that is open. That we can trust one another to keep confidence. That we can trust that if I go to Jim and say, you know what, Jim, I did something I'm really sorry about, it's been keeping me up, and I know it's hurt you. That I can trust that Jim will embrace that with a spirit of grace and mercy and forgiveness and not punch me in the nose. And that's part of our call as a community of faith, to do that for one another. So that we can get more comfortable with being able to bear one another's burdens. And confession is part of that. Now scripturally, we have an interesting thing going on with the idea of confessing sins. Where do you think confessing sins shows up more, in the Old or the New Testament? Someone said Old, and thou art right. Okay? It's much more in the Old Testament than the New. And here's why. Because in the Old Testament was about this sacrifice kind of a thing going on. If you made a mistake, through the year, when you did something wrong, you took the animal, they sacrificed the animal on your behalf for the atonement of your sin. And so the act of just bringing that animal, that act of sacrifice is already publicly saying, I have sinned. I've done something wrong, and this animal is going to bear the brunt of that punishment. In the New Testament, however, the language of confession changes. It shows up a handful of times to confess your sins. One of them is right here in this passage in 1 John. But most of the word confess in the New Testament is verbally proclaiming our faith in Jesus. Confessing Christ. In fact, in the back of our hymnals, we have things called confessions of faith. And the reason for that is because Jesus came and put a cap on that old sacrificial system. The idea is that our redemption is bought by Jesus Christ. And so what we are doing is confessing our faith in Christ, knowing we have been forgiven. And instead of focusing on all the things we weren't supposed to do, we are now focused on Jesus Christ, the one in whom we have put our trust, and living into his image. It's confessing Christ as opposed to confessing sins. It doesn't mean we don't confess sins anymore, but the language changes a good bit. Now, when I looked at that, I found that kind of odd, but then I found the reasoning for it to be pretty simple. Here's something else that's kind of odd, though. The passage on which the practice of confessing to clergy is based has nothing to do with confession of sin. Does that seem strange? It has to do with a single passage where Jesus is looking at the disciples, and he says to the disciples, whatever you forgive on earth will be forgiven in heaven, and whatever sins you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. In other words, the interpretation of the early church of that passage was that Jesus looked at the disciples, the apostles, and gave them authority that was on par with God to forgive or to condemn here on earth. How many of you would like the power to forgive or condemn here on earth? Not me. That's like a monkey with a handgun. But this practice comes into play where the church becomes institutionalized. How many of you, when they were looking for the new pope, heard on the news the term apostolic line of succession? That's a really fancy term. And really no need to know it fully in everyday language. But what that is this says that Jesus commissioned the first apostles to lead the church, specifically one apostle, Peter. And that as the church went, there was an apostolic representation at the helm of the church all the time. And that person is the Pope. And so the Pope, as the apostle or as the next one in that apostolic line, has the power to forgive and condemn as seen fit, but also to pass that power on to his designees, who happen to be the priests. Now, the reason this is so important is that if you believe that the apostles and their designees are the ones that have the power to forgive or condemn, you can't forgive or condemn what you don't know. So if you want to be forgiven, you've got to go and share the mistakes that you've made so that they can be forgiven by God's representatives on earth. And so we have this practice of confession and penance come in. Now the thing is, it really kind of came into its own when the church was institutionalized, which means it also institutionalized confession. There's a blessing and a curse that goes along with this. The blessing, and I believe that this is affirming of the idea of confession, I think, when it's done in its truest form. What it really is, it is our finally coming to terms with the fact that we've made a mistake. It's our unburdening of ourselves, because God knows that when we keep it in here, it adds so much stress and guilt and pain to us that it's hard to bear. And there's something about unburdening to somebody else that is freeing, and somebody that we can trust, and somebody we know has our best interest in mind. And at the same time, it is also ensuring that when we do that, we are reminded of the grace and the love of God. And penance, I do not believe, is like a holy spanking. I think that penance, really, when done correctly, is when we realize as we've drifted from God, what penance does is as we act it out, we are coming back into fellowship with God. Every act of penance, when done with a spiritual heart and a deep connection to Christ, is transforming. And so that thing that happened that separated us from God, now we're being transformed to something new. We're being resurrected to a new person. And we are becoming something more like Jesus Christ. That is the beauty of confession when it is done right. But then there's the other side of it, which is when you have religion and politics that are really tied together. And it so happens that the people with political power also have the power to condemn or redeem your eternal soul. Does that sound like a temptation to anybody else? You know? And so you have this back and forth. Now, believe it or not, we as Protestants have had the same kinds of blessing and curse. Anybody ever hear of John Wesley? Founder of Methodism. Okay? Methodist Church wouldn't be here without him. Wesley had a much more public concept of confession. If you were a Methodist, you had to be part of a group of people, a small group that met weekly, regularly, so that you could sit down and you could talk about your spiritual growth. You could talk about where you were having struggles, where you were doing well. Well, your dirty laundry was aired in these groups. This was a confessional space, and the point of Wesley doing this was to say, we are to be growing closer and closer into the image of God. The only way we do that is communally. The only way we do that is by being in a place where we can talk to one another about where we're struggling, and then pray together and uplift one another and love one another through the struggles of life, so that we can become more and more attuned into the image of Christ. Sounds pretty good. It's a wonderful system. Wesley was a bit of a control freak. And he took it a little bit too far. Because then what he did is he said, now, I'm going to make some standards, and I get to choose if you are worthy to take communion or not. So he would, either him or somebody who he designated, in those groups, would listen to people talking about what they were doing and how they were growing. And if they didn't think that they were growing the right way or growing enough or they were backsliding, they wouldn't give them a ticket to take communion. So you go to come into church, and you don't have your ticket, and they say, come back later. Is that off-putting to anybody? The way we are the way churches are today, that would be very off-putting. But he took it even a step further one time. This is where the temptation gets the better of some people. He had this gal who he was real sweet on, named Sophie. He loved her. But he couldn't commit. Now, ladies, or gentlemen actually, if you have a significant someone, right, that you're interested in, girlfriend, boyfriend, and they go on and on hemming and hawing and refuse to actually step up and commit, what are you eventually going to do? Charlie just gave the sign. Adios. Well, that's what Sophie did. She said, you know what? I'm done with this. So she found another guy. Now, if you've ever been jilted, does that make you happy? So how did John get back at her? She came to get communion one Sunday, and he said, too bad. You're not okay. You're not ready to take communion. Now he says, and even in his journal, he says, it was because she truly was not ready. But everybody else said she was fine. She wasn't the one with the issue, buddy. And it was such a scandal, it actually got him run out of Georgia on a rail and sent back to England. So this idea of a confessional spirit, depending on how it's managed, can get dicey, right? So I want to encourage this, because now we're going to really move into the scriptures we looked at today. Because of all of this, confession does have to be done with discernment. Because if we do it to the wrong person or in the wrong place, it's going to be destructive and punishing as opposed to healing and gracious. And confession is all about grace, forgiveness, restoration, peace, love, freedom, growth, and all those things that God has for us. And I think when we look at Proverbs and 1 John, we get kind of a good combination to sort of bring it home. When we look at Proverbs is all about kind of having contrast between things. And in this one in particular, we're just going to pick out one, because maybe it'll be sufficient to make the example. It says, better a poor man with integrity than to be rich and crooked. Okay? Now, at its core, that's basically saying this. Integrity is more valuable than riches. Fair statement? Okay? Now, you could, though, interpret that passage if you wanted to. You could look at that and potentially say, if you are poor, you have integrity. If you are rich, you are crooked. Likewise, there are other passages where people look at them and they would say, if you are rich, you are righteous because God is blessing you. And if you are poor, you are wicked because God is cursing you. And I saw some head shakes to the first one. What about that one? Think that holds up? No, none of them. Because it's superficial. It's not reflective. It doesn't look at the core of what this is trying to say. It tries to look at our own life circumstance and assume that because of something superficial, I have a depth of spirituality. But that's not the case. And the key to getting this unlocked is in reflecting on the message that the Bible, that Scripture has for us. If we're looking at that, reflecting on the truth of integrity and crookedness in my life, and asking myself, is there something out of place? And it doesn't matter what my bank account says. And here's where the confessional part comes in. If I want to change something, who is the first person I have to confess to? Yeah, me. That first act of confession is not to God, it's not to somebody else, it's in my own heart confessing and admitting that I have something that's out of step. And when I do that, something happens. Something has to happen. If I can't confess, I am stuck. Because I see no need for anything to change. But when I can confess in my heart that something is out of place, then something's got to give. Because then I either have to live with the discomfort of knowing something is wrong and I'm not making it right, or I take action and grow and transform and become something new, become someone better, become something more in tune with Christ in the world. And that's what confession does. It jumpstarts us. It's the trigger that gets things moving in the right direction. And then 1 John does something even better, because we saw these places where, confession may not always be safe. So we got to ask ourselves the question, if I'm going to do this, if I'm putting my faith in God and Jesus Christ, is this a safe thing for me to do? Is it safe for me to trust God with my deepest, darkest secrets? Now, there's one thing, anybody... Work, I'm sorry. The ridiculous thing when I think that is that, God doesn't already know anyway. Confession isn't for God's benefit. Confession is for my benefit. Because what John tells us here is that when we go to God in confession, God, He's faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. God is not looking to punish. God is looking to love. God is not looking to hold a grudge. God is looking to forget all about it. Give us a clean slate. Strengthen us. Uplift us. Give us joy. Give us peace. Let that stuff go so we can open up for what God has for us now. I like that message. So I get a little burned up. And when we look at the other piece to it where it says, if you say you have no sin, you are a liar and the truth is not in you. I can stand up here and give you a fire and brimstone about that if you really wanted it, but I don't think that's the point. I think what that's saying is this. You, me, we're imperfect. And if we're in Christ, we're striving to be something better. We're looking for perfection. And the only way we're going to get there is by admitting that we're not perfect and trusting in God to help us get over it and overcome it. And it starts with confession. To myself, sometimes to others, all times to God. Because when I do, I feel the forgiveness. I feel the redemption. I feel the grace wash over me. And you too. So this is so great. How do we do it? In the early church, early church, people confessed in front of the whole congregation. When it got institutionalized, you confessed to a priest. Nowadays, there's a mix. Some people confess openly, some people confess to a priest, some people confess something to a trusted loved one or friend, some people just strictly between them and God. Which one is right? Yes. Confession is essential to our soul. But discerning what is the right way to do it, that's up to you. That's up to your feeling the Spirit. I remember a situation where there was a guy who online had posted something really nasty and vulgar about his congregation. Do you think people found out about it? Think people were upset about it? Yep. How many people do you think actually went and talked to him about it? 0. None. So one Sunday, this guy, and you got to give him some serious courage going for this. This guy stands up in front of the congregation. He reads a letter that he wrote, and he confesses to the whole congregation what he did. And he apologizes for it, and he asks for forgiveness. Does that take guts? But I believe it. But you see, this guy realized something about that confession. He needed to do it so that he could look people in the eye and know what was out there. And the church needed him to do it so that they could hear him acknowledge that he had made a mistake and that he still loved them and that he wanted to be forgiven and to be restored. Now, that's not every situation. That's not every situation. Some situations we have it between just a couple of us. You know, I do something that offends another person. Does it make sense to bring that before the whole congregation? Probably not. Certainly not. That's just going to muddy waters that don't be muddy. But it is important for me to confess to that person individually and private what's happened, to restore that relationship. I think it is. It's not easy, especially if we have a history where that hasn't always gone well. But that confession frees me from the tension in that relationship and gets us started on track again. There may be things where there's something that's going on that really we haven't offended anybody, but maybe I've got something going on in my life that I know is out of step with God and with Christ, and I've got to unburden it. And maybe I find somebody that I trust and say, hey, I need some help with this. And that confession not only frees me from the guilt, it not only frees me from the tension between me and God, it also puts me in fellowship with somebody that can provide accountability for me to overcome whatever I'm struggling with. And always, always, that confession to God. And when we do that, when we live a life that is above the Lord, a life that is transparent before God, and as much as is reasonable before one another, something happens inside us. There's a peace, there's a comfort, there's a grace, there is a power in our actions and in our words. There is a light that shines in our example. There is something that exudes from us where we don't have to put up fronts, where we can be who we are authentically and genuinely, and our lives continue to grow and grow and grow. Our relationships continue to deepen and deepen and deepen, and we are every day becoming transformed more and more into the image of Christ. And when that happens, there is no other choice but for that example to spill into and affect the world and invite them to participate in the same forgiveness and the same grace that lights up my world. And yours too. Amen?